Have you ever wondered how one single event could plunge the entire world into a conflict so vast, so devastating? It became known as the Great War. It's a story of tangled alliances, imperial ambitions, and a single spark that ignited a global firestorm. This is the story of World War I. Let's rewind to the early 20th century. Europe was a powder keg. A complex web of treaties, known as the Alliance System, had divided the continent into two armed camps. On one side, you had the Triple Entente, France, Britain, and Russia. On the other, the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. These weren't just friendly handshakes. They were promises. An attack on one was considered an attack on all. It was a system designed to keep the peace through a balance of power. But in reality, it created a domino effect waiting to happen. Nationalism was also running rampant. People felt immense pride in their countries, but this pride often morphed into a dangerous sense of superiority and a desire for dominance. In the Balkans, a region simmering with ethnic tensions, Slavic peoples dreamed of breaking free from the Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires. To form their own nations, this fervent desire for self-determination was a constant source of friction, earning the region the nickname the powder keg of Europe. Then, there was imperialism. The great powers of Europe were in a frantic race to build global empires, competing for colonies in Africa and Asia. This scramble for resources and territory fueled intense rivalries, particularly between Britain, with its vast empire, and Germany, a rising industrial power eager for its place in the sun. An arms race, especially a naval one between Britain and Germany, further poisoned the atmosphere. Each new battleship launched was a statement, ratcheting up the tension and making war seem not just possible, but inevitable. On June 28, 1914, in the city of Sarajevo, the spark was lit. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, was visiting with his wife, Sophie. A young Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip, part of a group called the Black Hand, saw this as an opportunity. After a failed bombing attempt earlier in the day, fate gave Princip a second chance. He stepped forward and fired 2 shots, assassinating the Archduke and his wife. Austria-Hungary was outraged. They saw this as an act of aggression, sponsored by Serbia, and issued a harsh ultimatum. A list of demands so severe it was almost impossible for Serbia to accept fully. When Serbia couldn't comply with every single point, Austria-Hungary declared war on July 28, 1914. The dominoes began to fall. Russia, seeing itself as the protector of the Slavic peoples, began to mobilize its massive army to support Serbia. This mobilization triggered Germany, Austria-Hungary's ally. Germany declared war on Russia. Then, following a pre-war strategy known as the Schlieffen Plan, Germany turned its attention west. The plan called for a rapid knockout blow against France before the slow-moving Russian army could fully mobilize. To get to France quickly, Germany invaded neutral Belgium. This violation of neutrality was the final straw for Britain, which had pledged to protect Belgium. On August 4, 1914, Britain declared war on Germany. Within a few short weeks, the great powers of Europe were locked in a catastrophic conflict. Everyone thought the war would be over by Christmas. They were tragically wrong. The German advance into France was halted at the Battle of the Marne. What followed was the beginning of the war's most iconic and brutal feature: trench warfare. From the Swiss border to the North Sea, both sides dug in, creating a vast, static network of trenches. Life in the trenches was a living nightmare. Soldiers endured constant mud, rain, rats, disease, and the relentless psychological torment of artillery bombardments. Any attempt to break the stalemate resulted in unimaginable slaughter. Commanders would order massive frontal assaults, sending waves of men over the top into a hail of machine gun fire and artillery shells. Battles like the Somme and Verdun became synonymous with futility and death, where hundreds of thousands of lives were lost for gains of just a few miles of blasted, cratered earth. The war also saw the introduction of terrifying new technologies. Poison gas, first used by the Germans, caused agonizing deaths and spread sheer terror across the battlefields. Tanks were developed to try and break through the barbed wire and trenches. rumbling across no man's land like futuristic beasts. Aeroplanes, a recent invention, evolved from reconnaissance tools to deadly fighters engaged in aerial creating legendary aces. Submarines, particularly German U-boats, prowled the oceans, sinking merchant and military ships alike, bringing the war to the high seas, while Europe was the main theater. This was a true world war. The Ottoman Empire joined the Central Powers, opening up fronts in the Middle East. Japan, an ally of Britain, seized German colonies in Asia. Soldiers from across the British and French empires from India, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Africa were sent to fight and die in Europe and beyond. The war's reach was global. For years, the United States remained officially neutral, though it supplied the Allies with goods and loans. But two key events would change everything. First, Germany's policy of unrestricted submarine warfare, which involved sinking any ship heading to Britain, led to the deaths of American citizens, most famously in the sinking of the Lusitania in 1915. The final straw was the Zimmermann telegram in 1917. This was a secret message from Germany to Mexico, proposing an alliance against the U.S. if it entered the war. When the telegram was intercepted and published, American public opinion swung decisively. In April 1917, the United States declared war on Germany, bringing its industrial might and fresh troops to the exhausted Allied side. The arrival of American forces and a series of successful Allied offensives in 1918 finally tipped the balance. The German war machine, starved of resources and facing unrest at home, began to collapse. One by one, the Central Powers surrendered: the Ottoman Empire, Austria-Hungary, and finally, Germany. On the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918, an armistice was signed. The guns on the Western Front fell silent. The Great War was over. The aftermath was devastating. Over 16 million people, both soldiers and civilians, were dead. Another 20 million were wounded. Entire empires, the Russian, the German, the Austro-Hungarian, and the Ottoman, crumbled into dust, redrawing the map of Europe and the Middle East. The economic cost was astronomical, leaving nations bankrupt and facing a long, difficult road to recovery. In 1919, the victorious powers met at Versailles to hammer out a peace treaty. The Treaty of Versailles, however, would become one of the most controversial in history. It placed the full blame for the war on Germany, forcing it to pay crippling reparations, give up territory, and drastically reduce its military, while intended to prevent future aggression. Many historians argue the harsh terms bred resentment and economic hardship in Germany, creating fertile ground for extremist ideologies to take root just a few years later. The war that was meant to end all wars had instead sown the seeds for an even more terrible conflict just 2 decades later. The legacy of World War I is profound. It shattered old certainties, accelerated social change, and ushered in an age of anxiety and disillusionment. It showed the world the terrifying potential of modern, industrialized warfare and left scars on the global psyche that are still felt today. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you found this story compelling and want to explore more pivotal moments in history, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us bring more of these stories to you. Until next time, stay curious.